Hi, I'm Eric Chudler. I'm a professor at the University of Washington, and joining me today is Dr. Rajesh Rao, who's also a professor at the University of Washington. Thanks for joining today, Raj.
Oh, you're welcome. Happy to join.
So, where are you exactly working now? What department do you work with? Who do you work with? What's going on with you these days?
Yeah, so I'm in the Department of Computer Science and Engineering, now called the Paul G. Allen School of Computer Science and Engineering. I'm also the co-director of the Center for Neurotechnology. And yeah, so I guess as with all other folks at our center and all the computer scientists, I'm also working at home, mentoring all my grad students via Zoom, which has been interesting and challenging, but I think we're managing.
So you're in the Department of Computer Science and Engineering, but you're really a neuroscientist. Were you always interested in neuroscience?
Not. I would say that my journey into neuroscience began because I was trying to solve the computer vision or AI problem, artificial intelligence problem of how can you make computers recognize objects or people, for example, right? And I think the big revelation for me was just reading some of the research that was being done in cognitive science and neuroscience about how the brain solves that problem. And I guess I realized that we have a long ways to go on the computer science side to really get things to work the way the brain does, in terms of cognition, perception, action, and so on. And so that really drew me into neuroscience as a way to understand the general notion of intelligence, right, and the general notion of perception and cognition. And that's when I decided to do my postdoctoral training after a PhD in computer science. I did a postdoctoral fellowship over at the Salk Institute for Biological Studies, and that's sort of my official entry, I would say, into neuroscience. But as a child growing up, I watched Star Trek, and I was really fascinated by the mind meld of Spock, and the books like Carl Sagan's Dragons of Eden, and Oliver Sacks, of course, and Ramachandran's books on phantom limb. So I was definitely interested, but I never really thought I would have a career in neuroscience.
Yeah. So what are some of the things that you and your students are working on right now?
Yeah, so we're actually working on several different projects that are possible actually to do even with a pandemic raging, because we can, for example, do computer simulations of the brain. And so a lot of our projects have to do with either trying to model particular experimental results that have already been published using computer models that are inspired by artificial intelligence. So, for example, models of predictive coding in the brain about how the brain perceives things using predictions. How does it learn to make predictions? And so we have some recent papers on that. We've also looked at, for example, simulating the sensory motor system so that we can then use that model of how the sensory motor system controls, for example, a perceptual, a robotic arm, for example, or a simulation of a human arm. We can use that simulation of the sensory motor circuits in the brain as a way to then test brain-computer interfaces or brain co-processors, for example, such that you don't have to actually be in a lab to do these experiments. You can actually run a lot of your pilot studies using a computer model of a brain, if you want to call it that. And that's been really interesting and quite fruitful.
Yeah, now you mentioned brain-computer interfaces. I know you've been involved with that for a while. And that's really been in the news recently as well. A couple companies are working on that. There's a lot of research groups around the world that are working on brain-computer interfaces. But do you see any potential problems or social issues involved with brain-computer interfaces? I know the word neuroethics has come up a lot recently as well. Do you see any issues that might be impacting society with this types of research that you're doing and the work that others are doing as well?
Yeah, I think very much so. I think the fact that you have a device that's interacting with the brain, indirectly, for example, using cell phones, for example, smartphones are already doing that in some sense, right? But using your sensing organs and your actuators like your hands and so on. But now, if you have direct interaction with brain-computer interfaces and implanted in your brain, then I think it takes the whole notion of potentially influencing your activity in your brain, a step further, right? So I think the main issue there, of course, is that we first of all don't even understand how the brain works, and so now we have devices interacting with this dynamical system that we don't really understand. And then if you now having devices that use artificial intelligence, for example, to interact with the brain, I think that leads to a whole host of potential issues, such as, there's obviously security and privacy issues that one needs to be aware of. But even beyond that, the potential side effects that now we are already seeing with deep brain stimulators, for example, where the person may feel like there are changes to the identity, right, of the person, or even the family members might notice things have changed, even though the person may actually not themselves notice it. So I think there's those kinds of side effects and maybe unintentional uses, of these devices beyond the medical sort of prescribed use of the device. So I think there's a whole bunch of things that we don't yet know about, but that could potentially, lead to some pretty disastrous consequences. So I think the neuroethics aspect is extremely important. And so at the center, we've invested a lot of effort and funding towards neuroethics research. And I believe that engineers, my lab and other labs, we are very eager, and it's imperative on us to really collaborate with neuroethicists to make sure that we take these issues into account, as we're developing these devices, primarily for medical purposes, but one cannot deny that there's also augmentative purposes for these devices that, companies are going to be interested in. And that's something that I think we as academics should really, push and sort of get companies to acknowledge and then incorporate some of these neuroethics issues in their, design and in their devices.
Yeah, as scientists and researchers, we often think about what we can do, but we often don't think about what we should do or how we should conduct our research. So it's great to hear that you and your colleagues are thinking about some of these issues. So when you're not doing research and when you're not doing teaching, what keeps you busy? What do you do outside of research and teaching? What do you do at home, or do you have hobbies and other things like that?
Yeah, I have several different hobbies. I think some of them you can see in the background. There's a kite over there. There's an Indian kite that I fly. When the weather is nice in Seattle, I love flying kites. That's kind of fun to do with my kids, for example. The other big passion I have is for art. So there's a painting out there that you can see, but I collect paintings and art, Indian art especially. So that I spend a lot of time reading Indian art history books, for example. And then also I have other research interests like, ancient civilizations, and I love ancient scripts. So I have a mini sort of research project that I have that is looking at, for example, the undeciphered Indus Valley civilization script that I've been working on for some years now, but that's more of a hobby rather than a full academic pursuit. So yeah, just some of the, and then of course I love hiking. Love hiking and walking outdoors in Seattle and in the neighborhoods of of Seattle.
Yeah, the Pacific Northwest is a great place to get outside.
That's exactly right. Yeah, it's one of the draws that I had. That Seattle really offers so many beautiful places to go to.
Yeah. Well, I'll let you go. Thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk with me. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Eric.